Welcome back to the Python programming series. In the last couple of videos, we kind of went miscellaneously about getting our hands dirty with Python. Now, from here on out, I believe I would hope to make my videos a little more how would you say it, structured, and actually following the flow of a beginner Python programmer, at least for the Python videos. So in this video, we're going to be focusing in on control flow and logical operators. So let's get right into it. So what is control flow? Well, control flow is exactly what it sounds like. It's self-explanatory. It's controlling the flow of your program. So what is executed by your program, what's ignored, what's just passed on, whatever. Okay. So in control flow, there's specifically if statements. Well, in Python, there are if statements, else statements, and elif statements. Now, let me just elaborate on what I meant by in Python at least. What I mean is that all programming languages have control flow, pretty much if statements, else statements, elif statements, or some sort of that. But this is the specific syntax for Python, which I will show you right now. Okay, so I already have this my input set up. So we looked at input in prior video. And so we already know what this means. We take in an integer, its input, it's using the input function, and we cast that to an integer. Nothing more than that. Okay, and now let's type in an if statement. Now an if statement takes, you type in a condition in the statement. Again, it's a Boolean that'll return a Boolean value. We looked at Booleans before. That's just a true or false value. And so let's say if, you type in if, and then you have the condition. Now, obviously, remembering our relational operators are equal, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, greater than, less than, whatever, right? So we're going to be using that in the Boolean operators. I mean the Boolean conditions, the control flow conditions. Okay. So let's say if my input is equal to 0, then I don't really care too much about the code down here. The point is that how the if statement works. So let's just say your integer was 0. Okay, so let's just quickly run that in the PyCharm IDE. Obviously, run it from the top right of the screen or of the interface. And down here in the console, we can see we got what we wanted. Enter an integer, let's say 2. And it wasn't 0, so this wasn't executed. And so let's run it again. Let's actually enter 0 this time. And your integer was 0, was printed out. And that's because this condition was true. That's simple enough. That's all there is to if statements. Now let's move on to else statements. Now else statements are statements that are executed. Now, obviously, they don't need any condition, and that's because of what I'm about to explain. They're only executed if all preceding statements are false. Okay, and so if in this case, if this statement is false, which in the case of entering 2 would be, then the code in this would be executed. Okay, so here it would make sense that if their input wasn't 0, obviously you can automatically assume that their integer was not 0. Okay, you're just stating the obvious. So let's enter an integer that's not going to be 0, so 2. And you can see that your integer was not 0 was printed out to the console. And this is because the first if statement was false. Our input was not 0, and so this code was executed. Simple enough. Also, something I wanted to mention towards the beginning of the video was that from here on out, not only am I going to try to make each video, particularly for the Python programming series, a little more structured, but also a little more fast-paced. Because in the last few videos, yes, it was miscellaneous, and yes, maybe some of it was redundant. But I was just trying to get you your hands a little dirty with Python, but also let you have a good grasp on it. So that's why I was explaining a lot of little stuff for quite a bit of time. But from here on out, everything will be a little more fast-paced, so we can be a little more efficient. Anyways, back to the elif statements. We looked at if, we looked at else. Now, what are elif statements? Well, elif statements, well, first let's comment this out, and I'll tell you why I'm doing that. Elif statements are only executed if the preceding statements before them, so the statements before them, are false. And in addition to that, the condition mentioned in the statement is also true. So what do I mean? Well, it's best explained in this example. If my input is equal to 1, let's just say that, and just a random condition. Let's say your integer was 1. Okay. So in this case, if this if statement was false, then obviously this wouldn't be executed. Then since Python is procedural, that's why the order matters of these statements. And even pretty much like all other languages are procedural to some extent, at least. Here, since this would be false if the integer wasn't 0, the Python interpreter and compiler, Python would move on to check if this statement is true. And if it is, then obviously this code would be executed. So let's try that out. Enter an integer, let's say 1. And your integer was 1. And that's because this was not true, so this wasn't executed. And this was true, so this was executed. Simple enough. Let's move on to making these slightly more complex. Don't be afraid of this. Okay? Yeah, don't be afraid of the word complex. Also, before we move on to using the logical operators, I want to mention that else statements come after all other statements. There can't be multiple else statements for like for one block of code. Okay, so the else statement has to come after everything because again, Python is procedural. So so the else statement is only executed if all preceding statements are false. And that's exactly why I was getting a red underline right here. That's because I had an else statement before an elif. Okay, let me just retype that in. And there we go. And just for example's sake, I'm going to type in 2 and see that your integer was not 0. I mean, I can also just put or 1. But that doesn't really matter. You can see that this else statement was executed because neither one of these statements was true. Okay, simple enough. Let's move on to using logical operators in here. Now, there are 2 logical operators, and an or. Now, what and does, it allows you to, what should I say? It allows you to apply multiple criteria for if statement, for conditional statement, for if, elif, and elif statements for the control flow. Okay, so here I'm going to use and so let's say the second criteria is my input is less than 1. Okay, that would pretty much be a given because of this equal to 0, but that doesn't really matter. The point is that we're learning how to use this AND logical operator. Okay, so so with the AND, all criteria that's put in the if statement has to be true. If even 1 is false, then the code won't be executed under the statement. Okay, so let's just do this. Enter an integer, let's say 0. Your integer was 0. Now, I know that if you just enter 0, both of these would automatically be true, but the point is here just to know how this AND operator works. Okay, so both of these were true, and so this code was executed, and this condition wasn't even checked because obviously it's not just an if statement. Now, you can have multiple if statements, but again, if this is true, in this case, it's pretty much a given that this isn't true. Okay, and the else statement wasn't even considered because this was true in the first place. Okay, easy enough. Now let's move on to the OR logical operator. Okay, so let's say OR, my input is less than 1. Now, OR lets you also put multiple criteria, but in a different way. Now, obviously, or entails that at least one of the criteria has to be true for the code to be executed. All of them can be true. Some of them can be true. Some of them can be false. But at least one has to be true for the code to be executed. So let's take a look at that. And let's say enter an integer. Let's say 0. 0 would also satisfy both of these, but in this case, you only need to satisfy one of these to get your integer was 0, like we did right down here. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is to control flow and logical operators. I wanted to make this video pretty quick because, again, I want to make the videos from here on out pretty quick, efficient, and not redundant. So I don't want to waste you guys' time. If you liked the video, like the video. If you disliked it, dislike it. And if you dislike it, please tell me in the comments what you didn't really like about it. Maybe it was the efficiency, maybe it's my teaching style, whatever it is. I can improve in the next videos given your feedback. So that's all there is to this video. See you next time.